Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Green Sofa Dialogues. Today we're going to take a look at green hydrogen. Joining me for this exciting discussion are Enass Abo-Hamed, who is the co-founder and CEO of H2Go Power, and Dalin Hu, a regional director of sales and marketing for Siemens Energy. Enass Abo-Hamed, Dalin Hu, hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
I think I'd like to get right into our first question as we look at hydrogen. Enass Abo-Hamed, I'll ask you to answer first. Why is hydrogen the flagship of the energy transition?
First, it's a very good question to start from, to introduce us to the word of hydrogen and the word of energy transition and how these two are connected. Basically, the reason why we need energy transition is because what we have been doing so far in terms of reliance on an energy system hasn't been worked so far so well. And the reason and the outcomes of that are very apparent on our climate and our environment. Therefore, there is a need to transition to much better energy systems. So energy between transport and electricity accounts for around 70% of the emissions that we put out there, mostly carbon emissions. This is the cause of all the troubles that causes climate change. Therefore, if we replace that with a player like hydrogen, that could come at a significantly lower carbon print or a zero carbon print at the point of use if we're talking about green hydrogen. I think that, I hope you agree with me that this qualifies for a flagship player in the energy transition. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. And Dalin Hu, yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, yes, I understand that the hydrogen will be is in the flagship of the energy transition because we cannot wait. Energy transition is not something like we wait us. They're already in progress, and we are already deeply involved by this transition. More and more electricity cars or vehicles in the road, more and more the renewable energy installed. So we are in our society, daily life, we will use more renewable energy, and by using this renewable energy, we need something like storages. So that's why we use the hydrogen. Hydrogen is already promote as currently the large-scale energy storage systems in our energy systems. Yes.
Thank you. So hydrogen is already part of the process. What are some of the opportunities and challenges presented by a new global hydrogen economy? Enass Abo-Hamed, I'll ask you to go first.
So let's start from opportunities. Well, first, when you're about to create a new economy, or you're in the process of creating a new economy, the opportunities that comes with that are enormous in terms of financial successes, job creations, new skills added to workforces internationally and nationally, and opportunities for different countries to lead on the innovation and technology front, but at the same time utilize that in a new different way and change operations when it comes to the energy transition, changed operations to a much friendlier or carbon friendlier way, which is now less of a choice and more of a must, given the ravages of climate change. So that is still, I think, in my opinion, falls under a category of an opportunity to fix things while we still can. In terms of the challenges, obviously with a new industry comes new regulatory restrictions, infrastructure needs, investments that are not trivial to figure out, and all sorts of economical mechanisms that might need to be, not adopted but created from scratch, and that comes with uncertainty and discomfort of investors, which causes delay in really like getting on with kickstarting a new economy and wanting to do what needs to accelerate. So between opportunities and challenges, I guess government play a central role in seeing where the opportunities are, where the challenges are, and make choices. And what is so promising is it seems like governments are making choices, seeing a lot more opportunities and trying to address challenges. And I think this is an exciting point in time to witness that.
Thanks. I want to get to some of these new mechanisms in just a second, but I first want to give Dalin Hu a chance to weigh in some of the opportunities and challenges presented by a global hydrogen economy.
Yes, from my understanding, the fight against climate change is global task for every region, country, government, companies. So we all need to find the solutions. So it's kind of technology we need to find out in the worldwide. So when you deeply invest this database of CO2 emission, you will know they have a different kind of sector needed to be solved. So by this sector needed to find a new technology. So this is opportunity for this economic by us, but seems to find this economic way or this opportunities is very difficult. The reason is not only by install as much as possible renewable energy source. We are also need to think how to storage this this electricity. Not also we need to think about the application area from power industry, a heat environment. So we really think all this one. This also from the government side, we need them to support, because currently the green hydrogen is very expensive compared to gray or blue hydrogen. So we do some kind of pilot project, but we don't start the large scale this hydrogen business right now.
I want to talk about policy and regulatory measures. How do we go about creating those that can create an environment in which we have investor certainty?
So maybe starting from a policy and regulatory measures. Well, this will need to be very different in terms of first encouraging demand to creating demand, and then enforcing carbon measurements that basically enable alternatives like hydrogen that quantitatively contribute to significant reduction in emissions. I think these two are key points that we'd expect policy to address in order to accelerate the ecosystem creation at scale. And what comes with that is an economic structure that will basically enable when the demand is there, then I think there is some confidence for recurrent revenues because the demand has been created, and that would be an irreversible point, which I think is an encouraging point for private investment to follow suit from what government starts.
Thank you. Dalin Hu, please.
Okay, so from my understanding for this kind of challenging and also this the demands and challenges should be currently the currently the how to use of hydrogen is kind of how to use this hydrogen will be extended to various kind of polluting sector. So the polluting sector should be first at the cost. So it means when we buy something from the coal or from the natural gas, they already get this polluting factor factored in its cost. So we need to add this cost in their original the price, and then we compare with green things. Otherwise every green things will be seems more expensive. The main reason is we don't have the how to say like unified or unity the carbon tax for all the countries. If add this carbon tax in all the countries, and then we will see how green hydrogen or how green things will change our daily life. Yeah.
Enass Abo-Hamed, I look at you watching very, very intently, and I wonder if you have a comment on that.
I agree with everything that was said here, and not much to add. It's yeah, spot on.
Fantastic. Then let's talk about where we can come together a little bit more. How do we go about introducing something like common standards and terminology and certification when we're ready to go with green hydrogen?
Okay, I go first.
Yeah.
Okay, when I think a different region or different country, maybe they have their own roadmap. But if I see globally, I think the European maybe go faster right now, and how to say American also will follow. In Asia also we followed right now. In European, I think European have their carbon neutral target in the 2050. In China, we are carbon neutral goal is 2060, so 10 years later. But we also have a huge task or huge kind of decarbonization work needed to be done. And so we need first we need to create kind of like a standard, also kind of technology standard, also like a measurement standard tools or this process to see how we should go there. Because if we only talk about the hydrogen, they will miss the target. Maybe some gray or blue hydrogen will raise the first because they are cheaper. That's why I really want to use this time to say how we think about to only support the green hydrogen market race, and to avoid some blue or gray hydrogen market. So this is really think about it.
How I'll get to you in a moment, Enass Abo-Hamed, but how do we do that? How do we make sure that we don't go to blue hydrogen, to gray hydrogen? How do we make sure we're going to green hydrogen?
From I personally, I think it should be in the beginning. So in the beginning, we need to check about the resource. So every kilo or every gram of hydrogen should come from the renewable energy or hydro energy or nuclear energy. So this one is not produce any of the CO2 emission, right? And then doing this hydrogen production process, you check every steps. And then also when end customer they storage hydrogen, we also need to check how they do that. They are not only we sell them or to give to them, they also need some tank or some equipment to store this hydrogen. By storing hydrogen, different size, different time, they will use different energy. This energy, where it come from, should be also renewable energy. That's why from the beginning to the end, we need to check about the whole life cycle of this green hydrogen. Otherwise, this will be mixed with gray or blue hydrogen. Yeah, for sure.
Enass Abo-Hamed, I wanted to ask you also about these common standards and these terminology and certification, but if you have a comment about what our co-speaker just said, I want to make sure you have a chance to say that.
Yeah, maybe just to add that, yes, different regions seems to be working on different roadmaps. Europe is growing its ecosystem at a pace that is very different to the Middle East or the US or Asia. I personally don't know the answer to standardization, and I think this is a political question that might take some time to resolve. However, if one area or one region moves at fast pace, I think that what can be done here is sharing best practices. At the end of the day, lesson learned or policies adapted from one region to another that will have to do with creating demand, accelerating adoption, reducing costs, and the total benefit, the net benefit, will always be global. Yes, so I think in terms of certification, that will also, in my opinion, that will take a cycle, a development cycle that might take some time. At the moment, there are announcements for projects, there are pilot projects, but in the ground, how many operational projects there are that we can basically that would qualify for a universal certification standard? I'm not sure that there are so many. So I think that the point here is that there might be some learning on this, and this is very normal for an industry at its inception, if I can categorize it at its inception. So this was really the point that I wanted to add in addition to what's already been said.
On that topic, I want to ask you a little bit about your projects at H2Go Power.
Yeah, so we basically look at hydrogen storage, and we say, let's for a second pretend that no matter where hydrogen is coming from, as you increase the generation of it, which seems to be the targets in many countries around the world, at some point you need to start thinking about how to store it, because you're generating it to integrate it in operations or replace operations at scale. And that will need storage capability at some point. It might not be like the most critical point now, because generation projects are in design phase rather than implementation, but it will be an arising problem that you could put more than $1 billion figure at it if you wanted to market size it. And what's problematic with the current methodology of storage is that safety it remains a concern when you're compressing gas. Compression is the conventional method of storing gas. As you go to higher pressures, the cost of compression increases, and that totals around 55% of the storage process. Now, if you wanted to generate a lot of hydrogen, the cost of storage really matters. And as we are building economical structures, we really need to cut cost in all at operations across the entire value chains. So what we do is, instead of compressing gas, we convert it chemically into either solid state or liquid state, depends on the application, and therefore we reduce around 55% of the storage cost and increase the safety to levels that enable increasing the lifetime of the asset, and at the same time remove the need to think about OPEX and continuous maintenance across the lifetime of assets. We're focused on two markets. One of them is energy, storing energy in the form of hydrogen for long durations, whereby we're looking at grids and off-grids as the end user. And we're looking at a commercial drones market, whereby we extend flight time. If you compare what a battery powered commercial drone can achieve. We can extend that using hydrogen storage. And therefore, at the moment, we're focused on these two. In addition to that, we have a software product that allows cutting costs by predicting what's going to happen in the value chain and what are the moving parts, how to predict them. So you're generating hydrogen at the right time, you're using it at the right time, you're storing it at the right time. All these parts have cost to it. And if you know when to predict what's going to happen, you could reduce the cost of your, the journey of your molecule from generation to usage using predictive algorithms.
That sounds kind of exciting, if I may. And it sounds like you have sort of assembled some information that can help with other countries, sort of as we're building this roadmap in the world. I wonder, in order, in terms of best practices and sort of the work that you're doing, how do we go about building some kind of a green hydrogen knowledge database where the work that you do can be shared? If it becomes a best practice, how do we go about building something like that? Why don't you go ahead and take that, Enass Abo-Hamed, and we'll ask you next, Dalin Hu.
Technology-wise, this is definitely something that is achievable. I think in terms of execution pace, would be faster to execute when project becomes live, and like you have certainty and commitments and building and commissioning projects. That is definitely work in progress that has been started already, where we take pride in being part of it. And as more companies join into creating an ecosystem, I think the work towards that gets accelerated.
Mm-hmm. Dalin Hu?
Okay, so I think from my side is because our company is an energy company, we are Siemens Energy. That's why we are more focused on the power sector. Power sector is like a kind of to contribute to 40% of CO2 emission in the overall emission. So we are focused on this area. And we also, as a Siemens Energy, we also did a big milestone. Since 7 years ago, we launched the 1.25 megawatt Slider, this proton exchange membrane water electrolyzer systems in the market. Since that, the company has undertaken a commercial pilot with customer for different application. We have a project in the Europe, also have a project in China right now. So three years ago, we increased our project pipeline with a large one. We have a 10 megawatt version in 2019, together with our partner like Bond and Uspina, to build the first installation in the steel plant in Linz, Australia. And recently also we are Siemens Energy announced the world first integration and commercial large-scale plant for e-fuel in Chile. So it means we are really like to go from the power sector to the industry sector to find a green hydrogen application area. Also, we think about like a cost, how to do some kind of cost down for green hydrogen, because currently for hydrogen chain is from the equipment, also application, and also kind of with partner like EPC partners. That's why we cooperated with our Siemens Gamesa company and then to transfer this renewable power or wind power to the hydrogen application. So overall, we do a lot of things from the beginning to the end customer to find the very good application area. Yes.
It sounds like you're looking at applications all over the world. And when we look at it on a global scale, what about questions of the geopolitical map? what might be some of the changes that will come about to that geopolitical map as we move forward?
Okay, but for this one, I think it's a little bit complex for me because I myself I'm not a political man. But from I understand the carbon neutral will how to say like change the original way of the energy how to say geopolitical map for sure, because original like all this geometrical map around the oil and the gas and the resource right now by using the renewable energy capacity and reduce the reduction of the fossil fuel, so they will find the new way to find how to say to new or new alignment by this kind of how to say geopolitical map, but on the end it will be changed. But right now I just say it will be step by step. Yeah.
Enass Abo-Hamed, I know that I already asked you one political question, but I'm going to ask you this second political question too. What might be some of the changes to the geopolitical map?
Yeah, I think Dalin Hu brought a really interesting point, which is, when we talk about geopolitics, when it comes to energy, it's the oil and gas industry, and moving to the energy transition might really change that map based on, well, first, decision to invest, decision to change, decision to transition, because the generation technology, which is renewables, has been, the economics have gotten to a point where many countries can adapt. We're seeing trends of the poorest countries in the world, like some countries in Africa and Latin America, that are actually adopting strongly renewable energy, and that is because the cost of these have been reduced to a place where no country can be left behind if the decision is to transition. So that on its own is a motivation for completely, like, if you want, redrawing the geopolitical energy map with wind turbines and solar panels, where before this was a lot more than geographically where you are and what you have, and that's where who can hold the political power. Obviously there is like a power shift because of the new type of technology that we're using to generate power, and it will be really interesting to see how that shift will materialize in the next 10 years, for example, where you have countries who have a lot of control and geopolitical power because of oil and gas reserves, how they will adapt, transition, or hold on to what they have as opposed to others. I think there are so many moving parts, and we will probably be watching that dynamics changing.
You mentioned the next 10 years, and we are almost out of time, unfortunately, but I sort of want to ask you both. Dalin Hu, I address the question to you first. What are your biggest wishes in terms of the energy transition in the next 10 years?
Yes, for me, I think I wish this by, I think I can also every country, I think most country can reduce the reliability of fossil fuel, this for sure, and then by install as many as possible this renewable energy, also to reduce the CO2 emission. Also, I think the technology will grow faster in next 10 years, and also the many countries will collaboration together, because maybe some countries they only have technology, but the other countries they have a large space for apply this technology in there. That's why they did cooperate. So you will see in the next 10 years this kind of global cooperation, based on the energy transition, based on the hydrogen, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. And Enass Abo-Hamed, your wishes in the next 10 years?
I think you could probably guess what my wishes are, having started a hydrogen storage company 7 years ago. I really hope that we can see fast growth when it comes to more green hydrogen generation, more demand being created, more carbon being cut from highly emitting industries, whereby there will be best practices shared, there will be more of a global influence to growing the industry, and more cooperation, to achieve net zero faster, a little bit faster than 2050 in those countries who committed to these.
Well, thank you so much to you both. I want to give you a chance to a minute or so for closing remarks if you have anything that you didn't get a chance to say already.
So I have a very big dream in the market right now, especially in the China market, because we produce, not one-third of, almost one-third of CO2 emission right now in the globally. That's why we have a big dream, want to reduce this CO2 emission. Also, by this kind of reduce the CO2 emission, we will create a very big market or opportunity for green hydrogens. That's why Siemens Energy, we have set our department here, want to also collaborate with local Chinese customers. We find each sectors how to use this green hydrogen, how to cost down by this green hydrogens, and also I will wish this market to grow faster, and then we have more opportunities, also more orders, right? Yes.
Enass Abo-Hamed, any closing remarks for you?
Yeah, sharing Dalin Hu wishes, but also maybe just as a closing remark, as we are just about to host COP26 in this country, I really hope that as closing remarks that we basically all share very similar wishes and hopes to what Dalin Hu mentioned, but perhaps it would be good to see outcomes of COP26 that are acted on, where more innovation, technology, and people who want to move things with action could be involved and engaged. So hopefully COP26 this year will be a little bit more driving towards decisions that will be implemented in shorter time spans.
I know we're watching what's going to be happening with COP26 closely here from Berlin, and we look forward to see what happens then. A great big thanks to both of my guests today, Enass Abo-Hamed, who joins us from H2Go Power, and Dalin Hu from Siemens Energy. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ciao.
Okay.